3 months after the divorce, my ex-wife's sister called me. She said just one sentence, her voice trembling between guilt and urgency, like someone who has carried a truth for too long and finally can't keep it quiet any longer. I listened in silence, standing in the middle of the room, feeling the floor beneath my feet become empty space. The connection didn't bring me anger. It brought relief. Not because it hurt less, but because, for the first time in months, I was no longer the only one deceived. The truth, the one that had kept me awake and eaten away at me with every silence, finally had a name, a shape, and a story. The betrayal wasn't a one-night stand or an impulse from a moment of weakness. No. It was old. Frequent. Repeated like a routine. And worst of all, everyone around her knew. Everyone. Except me. The person who was supposed to protect me, care for me, love me, betrayed me not only with her body, but with the silence of the complicit gazes that hid what I couldn't see. They betrayed me while I smiled, while I made plans, while I held her hand thinking it was my safe place. In the months following the divorce, I walked like someone walking away from a fire, whole, but burned inside. I reviewed every detail, every gesture, every kiss, every conversation that now carried a different meaning. I wondered when it started, what I'd missed, what in me had been ignored or ridiculed. But it wasn't about me. It wasn't about what was missing. It was about what was left, dignity. I left in time. I left whole. I left before I became unrecognizable. Before I lost who I was trying to fix what she hadn't had the courage to admit. I took a deep breath. I forgave. Not for her. But for myself. Because carrying a grudge would be like continuing to live in a house on fire. And I needed to breathe again. She tried to come back. She tried to soothe the guilt with words that seemed rehearsed, with old memories, as if time healed what was unfairly torn away. She said she regretted it. That what she had lived with him was empty. That it wasn't love. But love was what she destroyed. Love was what I felt when I waited for her to get home from work, when I made her coffee early in the morning, when I left notes on the mirror saying I believed in her, even on the days she didn't believe in herself. Love was what I gave her in full, and what she returned in pieces. She apologized. She said she was willing to start from scratch. But her zero was the end of my path. And I was already somewhere else. A place where forgiveness wasn't reconciliation, it was freedom. While she was trying to win me back, her lover disappeared. He vanished like the sound of an ignored message. He took with him everything he promised and never fulfilled. And he left her with something no one can carry for another, regret. She didn't just lose a man. She lost the chance to be truly loved. The kind of love that holds your hand and stays. That listens in the silence. That surrenders itself to the details. She lost the opportunity to grow old with someone who chose her every day. And when she realized that, there was no going back. The first time I saw her after everything, she looked at me with her eyes downcast, as if asking for something she knows she doesn't deserve. There was no more anger in me. No more pain. Just a calm emptiness. A space that had once been hers and was now clean. Untouched. She told me all was forgiven. She lowered her eyes. I raised mine. And we went in opposite directions. That's when a new love appeared. Someone with a calm smile and unwavering eyes. Who listens with their whole body. Who doesn't mince words, but feelings. Who doesn't make promises, but presence. Someone who arrived unhurriedly, without strategy, without comparison. And showed me what it was to love without fear. Without doubt. Without wounds. With her, I learned that not all love needs to be born from a painful new beginning. Some love simply happen after peace. But what really sealed it all, was that afternoon. I was sitting in a cafe we used to go to. One of those places where silence reigns in every corner, where each cup carries memories. I was with her, the new woman who taught me the lightness of being loved without games. We talked quietly, laughing at nothing. She stirred her coffee with too much sugar and offered me the first sip as if the gesture were a ritual of affection. I took her hand. Without thinking. I just held it. Naturally. As if this were the right place. And it was in that instant that I saw it. My ex sitting 3 tables away. Alone. Her gaze lost in the touch of our hands. She said nothing. Didn't try to hide. Didn't look away. Just stood there. Staring. As if recognizing a place that was once hers. But is no longer. Her eyes said everything her mouth couldn't. She loved me. But now it was too late. She had lost me. Truly. Not just because of the mistake. But because of the choice to live the mistake to the end. And the end, that was it. Her seeing from the outside what she once had in its entirety. I wondered, then, if she remembered the nights I'd waited for her on the couch. The times I'd hugged her even when she was cold. The, "I just wanted to hear your voice," texts in the middle of the afternoon. My smile when she called me mine. I wondered if it hurt. If it hurt to see her love evaporate. And that mine had found another body to rest in. She never said anything. Never wrote. Never asked for it back. But she stood there. Staring. As if that moment were the sentence she never expected to receive. The punishment wasn't losing me. It was seeing me happy after being hurt. Seeing that, even with the scars, I still knew how to love. It just wasn't for her anymore. I haven't seen her since. I've heard she's been quiet, more withdrawn, trying to rebuild herself without the same faces around her. Because betrayal doesn't just destroy love. It destroys the trust of those who loved you, those who believed in you. It destroys friendships, bonds, family. It's a crack that grows wider until it swallows everything. And what's left, is regret. Silent regret, burning inside. Not out of guilt. But out of the knowledge that things could have been different. And that those who truly love don't betray. Don't lie. And, most importantly, don't destroy the heart of the one who chose them. But there was one detail she never knew. A part of the story no one told. And when that part emerges, there will be no more room for doubt about what really happened. Because every story has a center. A moment. A secret. A point where everything could have changed, but didn't. And when that moment is revealed, she will realize that the loss wasn't just of the love she had. It was also of the love she never knew. And that changes everything. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal it is not romanticized, nor justified, is exposed. All stories are fiction, but the feelings they evoke are real. Our goal is clear: show how betrayal corrodes relationships, destroys trust and scars lives forever. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is shocking, intense and unforgettable. Press play, and let the story begin. His name was Daniel. Hers was Emily. They met on a cloudy autumn Sunday in a small, nearly empty cafe, the kind that still places fresh flowers on the tables and plays instrumental jazz music over the speakers. Emily had a book open in front of her, but she wasn't reading. Daniel arrived with the look of someone carrying many questions and few answers. They exchanged glances by chance, but chance already had plans. Their first exchange was shy, unplanned, almost silly. But there was a lightness there that they both seemed to have been waiting for a long time. Their conversations grew longer, as if this place had been created just for them to meet. It wasn't about the coffee, the book, or the weather. It was about the calming presence. And in that moment, without either of them realizing it, a bond began to form. Daniel was an architect, meticulous with details, sensitive to spaces, but silent about his feelings. His eyes carried the maturity of someone who had lived more than he'd liked, and his gestures, the kindness of someone who prefers care to haste. He had a discreet relationship with the world, spoke little, but when he did, he said exactly what needed to be said. Emily was a high school literature teacher, passionate about words and the subtlety of people. She had a sweet but firm energy. She was one of those who liked to plant affection in small things, a note in a backpack, a surprise dessert, an untimely, "I miss you." Where Daniel was silence, she was sound. Where he was earth, she was wind. And perhaps that's why, together, they made sense. Their relationship began with the intensity of romances that don't scream, but leave their mark. They built their lives side by side, unhurriedly, respecting their space and celebrating their encounters. Emily had lived alone for years, but it wasn't long before Daniel occupied Sundays, then weekends, and then, little by little, entire weeks. Her apartment was a haven of light tones, with shelves filled with books, scented candles, and well-tended plants. He arrived as if he didn't want to disturb her, but brought with him the delicacy of someone who knows how to add value. He placed his guitar in the corner of the living room, his records on the bottom shelf, and his presence in their daily lives was so natural that, before they realized it, they were living together without ever having made anything official. The wedding came 2 years later, in an intimate ceremony in an open garden at sunset. They didn't invite many people, just the closest ones. Emily's sister, Olivia, was a bridesmaid and became emotional during the vows. Daniel spoke about how Emily restored his faith in love, and she spoke about how he taught her to love even on cloudy days. The kiss was long, the applause was sincere, and the party was small, but with a joy that no photo captures. It was the beginning of a promise, of a life together that seemed designed to last. And, for a while, it did. The first years of their marriage were filled with discovery and growth. Emily continued teaching, now at a new school, where she was well liked by her students. Daniel opened a small residential architecture firm with a longtime friend, and despite the ups and downs of the profession, he felt he was doing what he loved. Routines fell into place, Friday dinners became a tradition, and Sundays remained sacred, almost always beginning with breakfast on the porch and long conversations about plans for the future. They talked about travel, perhaps adopting a dog, buying a house with a garden, who knows. They had their conflicts, like any couple, but they always met halfway. There was patience. There was care. Olivia was a constant presence. Emily's younger sister, more impulsive, freer, more visceral. She had that kind of beauty that effortlessly commands attention, a mix of vulnerability and firmness that confused anyone trying to decipher her. She and Daniel had a respectful but reserved relationship. They talked when they were in groups, laughed together, but there was always an invisible barrier between them, as if they both knew that any excess intimacy would seem awkward. Emily loved having her sister around. It was an old connection, forged in childhood, in secrets exchanged under the covers, in pain shared without anyone knowing. Emily cared for Olivia as if protecting a piece of her own past. And Olivia accepted this care, even when she seemed to want freedom more than company. Life went on. Bills sometimes piled up, unexpected events arose, but there was a silent pact between them to move forward. Daniel was stable, emotionally present, attentive. Emily was intense, affectionate, but she was beginning to show a certain weariness. A restlessness that Daniel noticed in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. She said nothing, and he respected her silence. Sometimes she took longer to return from work. Other times, she would stay locked in her room for hours writing things in notebooks he didn't read. When he asked if everything was okay, she would say yes, just tired. And he believed her, because love, for him, was also trust. On social media, the couple seemed the picture of stability. Photos of trips, dinners, and anniversaries. But behind the images, there were distances that weren't visible. Conversations that stopped happening. Glances that avoided each other. Small gaps that grew. Emily, at times, seemed to be somewhere else even though she was right beside him. Daniel, for his part, tried to reconnect with simple gestures, a flower left in the car, a note on the mirror, an attempt to reminisce about the early days. But he didn't always find a response. And yet, he never stopped trying. Because for him, love was commitment, it was persistence, it was building even on days when he felt alone. The difference between them lay in the silences. Daniel was silent to protect. Emily was silent to hide. He believed love could be renewed. She, perhaps, no longer knew where love began or ended. Sunday lunches with Olivia still happened, but less frequently. There was something in the air, something no one said, but everyone understood. An unease disguised as fatigue, a tension that permeated their looks and gestures. Olivia spoke less. Emily listened less. Daniel observed more. And, little by little, the bonds began to loosen. Still, the plans continued. They talked about moving to a new city. Emily began distance learning for a graduate degree. Daniel took on bigger projects and spent more time away from home. But every night, when he arrived, he'd leave his phone in the corner and sit next to her on the couch, waiting for her to invite him back into her world. And sometimes she'd let him. Sometimes she'd rest her head on his shoulder and they'd sit there, silent, as if trying to remember who they were before they lost themselves in the demands of everyday life. It was during this phase, this invisible transition, that something inside Emily began to change. She withdrew, even when she claimed to be fine. Daniel felt it. He didn't know why, he didn't know how, but he knew something was breaking between them. And like someone who feels a glass slip from their hands but can't stop it, he watched the distance unfold with the helplessness of someone who loves too much to face the inevitable. But he didn't know. He couldn't imagine. For him, it was just a phase. Like so many others he'd already overcome. And that's why he kept going. He kept believing. He kept trying. He kept loving. Because Daniel deeply believed that when two people truly choose each other, they always find a way back. Even when the road gets lost for a while. Even when everything seems far away. He just didn't know that this time, the path wasn't back. It was far away. And that some returns don't happen. Not because the love ended. But because he was abandoned along the way. And somewhere between the silences, between the disguised absences, between the avoided glances, the breaking point already existed. Invisible. But definitive. The end began with details too small to be immediately noticed, yet weighty enough to accumulate silence within someone who loves completely. Daniel had been waking up earlier than Emily in recent months. He'd make coffee, set out the bread, leave his phone charging in the living room so as not to disturb her sleep. He didn't say it, but he noticed that the kisses were quicker, the hugs more formal, as if greeting out of politeness rather than desire. Emily, for her part, smiled less. When she did, it was for others. On her phone, in videos, in the messages she'd reply to, hiding the screen with the involuntary movement of someone no longer comfortable being seen. Daniel didn't question it. Not yet. He wanted to believe the wear and tear was just a reflection of routine, that a weekend away, a fresh start, a leisurely planned trip would suffice. But what was dying between them wasn't desire, it was the will to save. The nights grew longer. Emily spent more time in her makeshift office, citing graduate school deadlines, and Daniel, after leaving the dishes clean, would go upstairs without insisting. Sometimes he would stand at the bedroom door, listening to the soft sound of her laptop keys, as if wondering if it was right to interrupt someone who had slowly but surely walked away. It wasn't just the touch that was missing. It was the look. The one that recognizes. That searches. That calls. Emily was there, but she seemed to be in another time, living another story. When asked, she would smile and say it was just fatigue, stress, that maybe they really needed a breather. And Daniel believed her, because he still preferred doubt to confrontation. The turning point came on a Thursday. They were on their way to dinner with mutual friends, and on the way, Emily was fiddling with her phone with a slight smile on her lips, while Daniel drove with a blank expression. He noticed the reflection in the glass, saw the name flash on the screen for a second, but didn't comment. He felt something tighten inside, a familiar discomfort, an intuition he preferred not to name. During dinner, Emily left several times to answer messages. Daniel didn't look. He didn't question. But something changed inside him that day. Silence stopped being a safe place and became a space of alert. The distrust didn't come with shouting, it came with absences. And he began to notice. In the following days, tension settled in almost invisible details. Emily no longer left her cell phone on the table. She left the house in clothes she hadn't worn in months. She touched up her makeup even when she said she was just going to the library to study. Daniel watched. Not with jealousy, but with the look of someone losing something precious and unsure how to stop it. Emily's sister, Olivia, began to show up less. When she did, she avoided being alone with him. Their conversations became more secretive. Spontaneity gave way to caution. Olivia seemed uncomfortable, like someone carrying a secret they couldn't share. Daniel tried to talk to Emily one night, asking if everything was okay between them, if she still saw herself there, if there was anything they needed to face together. She responded sweetly, but with a cutting coldness. She said she was just confused, about life, about her choices, that she needed time. And he gave it to her. Because he believed that love was also about knowing how to wait. But the time she asked for wasn't to rebuild. It was to walk away. And then, confirmation came. It was a coincidence. Or maybe not so much. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel returned early from a project in another city. He didn't let her know. He wanted to surprise her with flowers and an invitation to go out. He arrived home, left the car in the garage, and quietly climbed the stairs. The bedroom door was ajar. And what he saw, for less than 3 seconds, would be enough to change everything. Emily wasn't alone. Sitting on the bed, she was talking on the phone to someone who clearly made her smile in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. There was no touch, no kiss, no direct confession. But the tone, the words, the muffled laugh, the way she said, "I miss you," they were like thin knives slowly sinking in. Daniel went downstairs without her noticing. He sat on the sofa. He left the flowers on the floor. And he waited. When she came downstairs, hours later, he didn't speak. Neither did she. That night, they slept in the same bed, but separated by a chasm. She turned away, and he stared at the ceiling. And for the first time, Daniel understood that there was something between them that could no longer be mended. In the following days, he stopped trying. He stopped asking, seeking, reaching out. He began working more, sleeping less, responding with mechanical gestures. Emily noticed, but didn't react. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe out of fear. Or maybe because she knew, deep down, that there were no more possible excuses. Olivia called once, tried to talk to Daniel, but he refused. He sensed the presence of someone in her who knew more than she was letting on. And that drove him away. He suggested divorce. Calmly. Without arguments. He said he no longer saw a future there, that their feelings had changed, that perhaps it was time for each of them to go their separate ways. Emily cried. She tried to argue. But she didn't deny it. Because denying it would be lying not only to him, but to herself. They signed the papers in silence. No witnesses nearby. No friends. Just the two of them, ending something that had once been everything. Daniel moved out. He took few things with him. He left the piano, the shared books, the paintings they'd bought together. Not because he no longer wanted any of that, but because he knew that love, when it ends, doesn't take memories, it only takes the part that can't be touched. Emily stayed in the house. She didn't leave for days. Olivia showed up a few times, but the atmosphere was tense. There was hurt in the air, regret, something unspoken. Daniel didn't seek it out. He didn't block it out either. He simply chose silence as a means of survival. 3 months passed. And then, the call. Olivia, nervous, anxious, saying she needed to tell him something. That she thought he already knew. That she couldn't keep it in any longer. And it was in that moment, in that unannounced phone call, that the betrayal went from suspicion to fact. Emily wasn't just confused. She'd been involved with someone else for longer than anyone realized. The relationship didn't begin after the breakup. It coexisted with the marriage. 4 months. Maybe years. And everyone around knew. Everyone except him. Daniel listened to everything without interrupting. Each word was a wound reopening. But he didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't hang up. When the call ended, he sat there, phone still in his hand. The house was silent. His heart, finally, at peace. He knew. Now, he knew. But what he didn't know yet, was what came next. Because there was something Olivia didn't say. Something that would change the meaning of everything. The call had ended, but something remained in suspense. Daniel felt in his body that dense sensation felt when a truth has just passed through the soul and hasn't yet found a place to rest. He paced the room in silence, trying to reorganize his ideas, his memories, the now clear noises of a recent past. What had once been doubt had become a realization, but there was still something there, something in Olivia's hesitant tone, in the way she breathed between sentences, as if about to say more, and then fell silent. It wouldn't leave his mind. And the silence, once again, became an uncomfortable presence. He lay awake all night. The image of Emily smiling on the phone, her eyes averted, the gradual distancing, everything fit together like pieces that finally revealed a painful but now understandable picture. What he hadn't expected was that there was still a missing piece. And that this piece, once placed, would completely change the very fabric of what he thought he understood. 2 days later, Olivia asked to see him. She didn't want to talk on the phone. He said it was important, that he couldn't put it off any longer. Daniel hesitated. He'd already received everything he needed to move on. The divorce was painful, the betrayal a wound in the process of healing. But something inside him told him that wasn't the end of the story. When she arrived, he noticed a weight on her face that wasn't just regret, but an internal conflict that had been lingering for a long time. Olivia always had a restless look, but that night, there was a new weariness in her features. They sat on the porch, where the wind cut through the night with a certain violence, as if even nature sensed what was about to be revealed. Olivia took a while to begin. She stared at her fingers, pressing her nails into her palms, breathing deeply. When she finally spoke, it wasn't with an explanation, but with a question. "Do you remember that Saturday, the one you came back early from your trip?" Daniel nodded. He didn't need details. That image was imprinted with precision. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, as if needing to access something that hurt. That night, she wasn't just on the phone, he said, his voice breaking at the end of his sentence. Daniel frowned, his stomach churning. Olivia continued, looking straight at him. "I was there, Daniel. I saw it." The next few seconds seemed to make no sense. His mind tried to process what he had just heard, but it refused to accept it. He said nothing. He just waited for her to continue, even though each next word was a blow. He wasn't just a fling. He came here. She welcomed him. In her room. On the couch. Where you used to sit and play your guitar. And I knew. From the beginning. I knew. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, as if he could stop it from becoming real. Olivia swallowed hard. "I didn't just know. I covered for her. I lied. I covered for your outings, distracted you at parties, made excuses. Emily told me it was just a phase, that she needed to figure out what she felt, that maybe she was confused. I believed her. Or wanted to believe her. But it wasn't confusion. It was choice. Anger didn't come immediately. What followed was a profound silence, like that of a city after a disaster. Daniel looked at the ground, at his hands, at anything but her face. But Olivia didn't finish. I went there that day. I saw everything. I heard it. They laughed, they made jokes about you, about your calmness, about how easy it was to fool you. And I stood there. Standing. In the hallway. Not knowing whether to scream, leave, or slam the door, she ran her hands over her face, trying to hold back the tears she could no longer hold back. I didn't say anything. Not that day. Not after. And it destroys me inside, Daniel. Because you were always good to her. To me. Always there. And I let you be deceived. He stood slowly, as if his body were heavier than it should have been. He walked to the balcony railing, rested his hands on it, and stood there, silent. Olivia stood soon after, approaching hesitantly. There's one more thing. Daniel didn't turn around, but he heard her. Her voice was now a thread. The man, the guy she cheated on you with, he was my ex. The impact of the sentence didn't come all at once. He felt as if the world were opening up beneath his feet. Olivia continued, feeling a mixture of shame and revulsion. He had broken up with me a few months before he started dating her. At least that's what I thought. But then I found out that he was already talking to Emily while he was still with me. They met because I took him to dinner at your house. Your house, Daniel. His breath caught. Daniel turned his face slowly, his eyes moist but steady. Olivia trembled but held her ground. She knew. She knew he was mine. She knew what he had done to me. And yet, she chose. And I let her. I thought it would pass, that she would stop. That it was just need. But she chose to stay. And when it was all over, when you left home, when she was alone, he disappeared. Vanished from her life. As if she had never been anything. Daniel breathed like someone relearning after drowning. This wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was a collapse of everything. Of trust, of family ties, of dignity. He ran his hands over his face, turned away, and sat down again. Olivia sat next to him, but without getting too close. She knew there was no consolation. I wanted to tell you before. I swear I did. But I was also broken. I lost the sister I thought I knew. I lost you. I lost myself. He finally spoke, his voice low and clipped, and why now? She took a moment. She looked up at the sky. And replied, because seeing you at peace, made me realize how much you deserve this truth. Even if it hurts. Because it's yours. There was a long silence. And there, in the middle of the night, amid the scattered shards, Daniel understood. He understood that what hurt wasn't the end, but everything that had to be ripped away. What had been lied to, hidden, protected by those who should have cared for him. It wasn't just about Emily. It was about everyone who knew. About the fake smiles, the empty hugs, the dinners shared with people who schemed behind his back. But it was also about him. About how, even in the face of disloyalty, he had managed to stay together. And that was his victory. Olivia stood slowly. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. That she had no right to ask. She just wanted him to know. Before leaving, she paused hesitantly at the door. Are you going to tell her you know? Daniel looked straight ahead, fixed. She already knows. And when Olivia was gone, the silence that remained was no longer heavy. It was the silence of liberation. Of the end. But also of a new beginning. Because now, he knew everything. And he no longer carried any doubts. And the next day, he would see her again. In an unexpected place. At a time when everything, once again, would take on new meaning. The next morning, the sky was overcast, and the city seemed charged with a silent tension, as if the air had thickened. Daniel woke before his alarm, not from insomnia, but from a different state of wakefulness. It wasn't restlessness, it was lucidity. He ran his fingers through the window curtains and remained there, observing the almost static movement of the streets, wet from the light rain that had fallen during the early morning. The taste of the coffee didn't seem the same, nor did the silence of the house. There was a painful clarity to everything, as if he now saw the world with a clarity he hadn't had before, even though he knew that clarity had come at a great price. He didn't know what the day would bring, but something was pushing him forward, as if he needed to face it, close cycles, put an end to it, even if that didn't change what had already been written. It was late that afternoon, in a discreet cafe he'd often frequented during the early years of their relationship, that everything happened. He hadn't planned to go there, but his feet carried him as if that choice were inevitable. The place still had the same wooden furniture, the same soft instrumental music, and the same woman behind the counter, who greeted him with a welcoming smile, no questions asked. He chose a table in the corner, near the window, and sat there with a cappuccino in his hands, not to savor it, but to have something to hold. Outside, life went on, hurried, indifferent, but inside, everything was on hold. And then she walked in. Emily seemed smaller. Not physically, but in the way she moved, the way she held her bag close to her body, the way her eyes avoided meeting his. She hesitated when she saw him, but walked toward the table without waiting for an invitation. She sat down slowly, on the other side. There was no nervousness in Daniel, just a steady serenity, as if he had nothing left to lose, and nothing left to keep. "I heard you saw Olivia," was all she said at first. Her voice was low, as if testing the room. Daniel nodded slightly. He didn't answer. He just waited. Emily continued, now a little more tense. "Did she tell you everything?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. She lowered her eyes, ran a hand through her hair, as if seeking solace within herself. There was blatant guilt, but also a certain pride still present, the kind of pride that protects those afraid of falling apart. When she spoke again, her tone was a mix of outburst and plea for mercy. "I didn't plan it. I swear I didn't. At first, I was just confused. I felt invisible, numb. And he appeared in a way that filled an empty space I didn't even know existed. I knew it was wrong. Every second was wrong. But I stayed. I lost myself. And when I realized, I couldn't leave." Daniel kept his eyes fixed on her, but his expression wasn't judgmental. It was almost neutral, like someone who's lived through the hurricane and is now simply observing the damage. Emily struggled for words, but she seemed to be fighting a sea of memories and shame. "I thought about telling you so many times. But I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of losing what we were. But I had already lost. When I cheated, I lost you. Even though you were still there. I saw it in your eyes, every time you tried to reach me, and I didn't know how to answer you anymore." Daniel let out a slow breath, leaned back in his chair, and finally spoke, his voice firm but not aggressive. "It wasn't just about me. It was about you. About who you chose to be in that moment. You didn't cheat on me out of need. You cheated because you wanted to. Because you thought you deserved more. Because you thought what we had wasn't enough anymore." She interrupted him with a slight desperation in her voice. "It wasn't about deserving more. I don't know how to explain it. I just lost myself." Daniel lowered his gaze for a moment, then looked back at her. "And in the midst of your loss, you took everyone with you. You took me. You took your sister. You destroyed what little was left between you. For a man who disappeared at the first sign of trouble." Emily was silent. Tears began to fall. She didn't try to hide them. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't hiding them. She was exposed, without makeup, without apologies, without the protection of pride. Daniel continued. You know what hurt me the most? It wasn't being betrayed. It was keeping trying, while everyone else already knew. While you had already given up. While you laughed with him behind my back. You looked me in the eye and still, deceived me. That's what hurts the most. She shook her head, almost in despair. I never laughed at you. Never. I swear. What I felt for you was real. It still is. I messed up. I messed up badly. But I loved you. I still love you. You were the best of me. And I destroyed that. I know I did. Daniel looked out the window, his eyes watery, but with a calmness that came from certainty. Yes. You destroyed it. But not just by betraying me. You destroyed it because, when you had the chance to choose me again, you chose silence. I reached out so many times. You pulled yours away. And now you want to give it all back to me with one sentence. Emily pressed her lips together, swallowing hard. I didn't come to ask to go back. I came to ask for forgiveness. Truly. Not for myself. But for you. Because you deserve to be free from this. He nodded slowly, his voice softer now. I forgive you. Because forgiveness is the only way to come out of this in peace. But it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't erase what was said. What was hidden. What was lived without me. She wiped away her tears, took a deep breath. I know. I just needed you to know that. Daniel stood up. He looked at her one last time, and said with a tone of genuine farewell. Now I know. And that's enough. And then he left. Outside, the air was lighter. He walked aimlessly through a few streets, letting the wind hit his face, as if each step were a part of him returning to his own body. There was no more anger. There was no more love. There was only freedom. And when, by chance, or perhaps by fate, he saw her, on the other side of the sidewalk, holding a child's hand and smiling as if her heart were at peace, he knew. What Emily had tried to reconstruct in words was no more. What had once been a promise was now past. And the present was there. In the calm smile of someone who never had to lie. In the eyes that never looked away. Peace, finally, was his. And there was nothing more to say. He didn't return home that day. Or the next. He needed to walk, breathe away, allow the world to touch him without it being through the shadow of the past few years. He walked streets he no longer recognized, but which seemed to understand him. He sat on park benches, watching children running, dogs barking, couples arguing quietly. The ordinary lives of other people were, in a way, a silent solace. There was beauty in the ordinary, even when his heart was filled with shrapnel. What Daniel felt now wasn't pain, it was a strange absence, as if a huge weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders, but with it, he had left a part of himself. The truth had been revealed, faces unmasked, intentions exposed. But knowing everything didn't mean feeling whole. He felt empty. Not out of regret, nor out of resentment. But because, when justice arrives, it doesn't bring applause. It brings silence. In the following days, he calmly sorted things out. He donated books he no longer wanted to read, got rid of clothes that held old scents, and took apart photographs with steady fingers. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about rebuilding himself without the memories that kept him trapped in a place he no longer lived. The piano was sold. The sofa was replaced. The address was updated. He wanted, more than anything, to start over. But I knew that real new beginnings don't happen overnight. They happen within. Slow, drawn out, silent. And sometimes, they hurt. The new house was small, bright, with a narrow porch that caught the morning sun. It was unlike anything he'd ever owned, and for that reason, it felt right. There were no traces there. No ghosts. Just space. He began cooking more, working more diligently, answering emails more attentively. He reconnected with old contacts, called friends he hadn't heard from in years, and rediscovered small parts of his own life that had been frozen while he tried to salvage a marriage that was already crumbling. Little by little, he began to hear himself again. And amid this rebuilding, a new face began to emerge. It wasn't planned. There were no promises or urgency. Just casual encounters, light conversations, glances that lingered a little longer than expected. She was calm, with a discreet smile, the kind that doesn't try to please, but welcomes. She liked to observe more than speak, but when she did speak, it was with the firmness of someone who knows where she's standing. She had a habit of listening like someone reading a book, listening even between the lines. They met by chance in a new cafe in town, bumping into each other over a misplaced order. The conversation was brief, almost inconsequential. But that night, he realized he'd gone to sleep with a different feeling. For the first time in months, he didn't think about what he'd lost. He thought about what might come next. The encounters continued, without urgency, without the need to name what was emerging. He didn't talk about the past, and she didn't ask. I knew, perhaps intuitively, that some stories should only be heard when those who live them are ready to tell them. And Daniel wasn't. Not yet. But there was a new care in him, a delicacy in allowing himself to be seen again. Not as someone needing to fill a void, but as someone wanting to share a space built with calm. Little by little, he allowed himself to smile more, to open the door with less hesitation, to pour 2 glasses of wine instead of just one. Meanwhile, Emily seemed to slowly disappear. Not truly, but from living memory. Daniel knew from Olivia that she was still trying to start over, that she had sought therapy, that she had cut off contact with the man she once chose over her own husband. Olivia, for her part, maintained a respectful distance. There was a silent apology between them that didn't need repeating. They didn't become friends, but there was a genuine truce. And for Daniel, that was enough. Some wounds heal when the pain is acknowledged, even if the bond isn't rebuilt. It was during an ordinary afternoon, as she was leaving a photography exhibition, that the past came flooding back. Emily was there, sitting alone on a garden bench, her eyes closed and her shoulders hunched. When she saw him, she stood up. There was something new about her, something stripped of vanity, of control. She seemed older, not in her face, but in her soul. She approached slowly, and he didn't back away. He just waited. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her tone soft, almost resigned. Daniel nodded, without smiling. "Neither do I." She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at him. "Are you well?" "I am at peace." Emily smiled, a sad smile, but a genuine one. "I never knew what it was, until I realized I truly lost you." Daniel didn't answer right away. There was so much he could have said. But he chose silence. She continued, her gaze moist but firm. "I just wanted you to know, that regret isn't just for what I did. It's for everything I didn't do. For not appreciating your presence. Your constancy. Your generosity. You were my harbor. And I sank alone." He took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, he felt compassion. Not as someone who forgives, but as someone who understands. "You made your choices, Emily. And I made mine. The pain is gone. But the respect I had for you, that won't come back." She nodded slowly, accepting each word as a necessary punch. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to explain herself. And that was precisely what made that moment real. She didn't want to wash away the guilt. She just wanted to acknowledge the damage. Daniel waved goodbye lightly, and she stood there, watching him leave. And this time, there was nothing left between them. No hatred, no resentment. Just the end. In the days that followed, something inside him settled. As if each part had finally found its place. The past no longer hurt. It was just a memory. The anger was gone. Only the certainty that he had survived. And more than that, he had evolved. Matured. And now, he could love again, without fear, without comparisons, without the traumas that had once held him back. And it was late one afternoon, beside that woman with the calm smile, that he understood that true love isn't the kind that screams or demands. It's the kind that endures when everything else falls apart. And that some losses, however painful, are also liberations. But what Emily didn't know yet, is that that moment on the garden bench would be the last time she would see Daniel up close. And that, in itself, was already a punishment. Daniel began to walk more slowly. Not out of fatigue, but out of a new awareness of time. Everything he had experienced up until that point had shown him that haste sometimes only postpones the inevitable. The rhythm of life was his own again, no longer governed by the anxiety of saving what was doomed, nor by the guilt of not having realized it sooner. Now, his footsteps came lightly. The sound of his shoes against the wet ground seemed harmonious. Even silence, which had been a suffocating enemy for so long, became an old friend who only remained with those who had learned to listen to themselves. Mornings resumed with longer coffees, with pages of books that finally managed to hold his attention. He relearned to listen to music without associating it with anyone. He watched entire movies without being swallowed by memories. The memories of Emily hadn't disappeared, but they no longer occupied the same place as before. They returned, yes, in insignificant details, the smell of perfume in the elevator, a random song on the radio in the taxi, a word repeated by someone in the grocery line, but when they came, they didn't hurt. They simply passed. Like a light breeze. Like an echo of something that no longer had the strength to hold on. Olivia gradually resumed contact. Not frequently, nor deeply. But respectfully. She understood Daniel's limits, and more than that, she seemed to understand her own. The shame of what she'd allowed still lingered in her eyes, but now there was also a silent desire to rebuild something, even if it was just her self-confidence. Daniel harbored no resentment. But he also didn't force reconciliation. Some bridges, once broken, can be recrossed, but they always creak underfoot. Still, he accepted Olivia's new place in his life. Not as an essential part, but as someone who, no matter how much she'd made mistakes, was still part of the same story. One afternoon, while organizing the books on the living room shelf, now more spacious, more his, he found a blue-covered copy with a handwritten inscription from Emily. It wasn't a romantic phrase, nor a cliché. It was a request. May this book always remind you of how much more you are than you think. Love, E. For a second, he stood there, the book in his hands. He didn't feel angry. He didn't smile. He simply understood that perhaps even she didn't know how much more he truly was than she thought. Perhaps that's why she lost him. Some people only see their value after they lose their peace. It was also during this period that his relationship with Mia, the woman with the calm smile, began to take root. She didn't demand answers, nor did she invade space. She was patient. Present. And deeply sensitive to the time Daniel still needed to surrender completely. She never asked about Emily. Never tried to compete with ghosts. She simply was. With her simple gestures, her active listening, her calm way of existing beside him without needing to impose herself. Daniel, in turn, noticed the difference not in the big things, but in the small ones. In the way Mia held his hand without squeezing, how she laughed effortlessly at the silliest jokes, how she looked him in the eyes even in moments of silence. There was no pressure there. There was a welcome he never knew he needed, but which, now, he could no longer live without. One night, after a quiet dinner on the balcony, Mia was watching the city lights and said, without looking directly at him, "Have you ever noticed that peace never makes noise?" Daniel smiled at the corner of his mouth. He didn't answer. But that phrase stayed with him. For days. Because yes, it was true. Peace arrived as if unintentionally. And suddenly, it was everything. It was in this context of quiet rebirth that, unexpectedly, a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. Plain envelope. No return address. But he recognized the handwriting immediately. Emily. Daniel hesitated for a few minutes before opening it. He took a deep breath, sat down, and turned on the lamp. The paper was slightly wrinkled, as if it had been folded and reopened several times. The text began with a silence, as if it had taken her a while to find the courage to even reach the first line. Daniel, if you're reading this, it's because I've finally found the courage I've always lacked. I don't expect an answer. Nor forgiveness. I know you've already given me that in your silence. But I needed to record it, in a way that wasn't a request. But a truth. I destroyed you. And it destroyed me. I spent months trying to understand why. Why I betrayed someone like you. Why I lied. Why I allowed myself to sink. And the only answer I can find is this: I was so disconnected from myself that I couldn't recognize who truly loved me. I traded depth for distraction. Love for ego. Truth for vanity. He was just a mirror of my emptiness. You were my ground. But I wanted to fly. And in the flight, I got lost. It was never your fault. You were the best part of me. And maybe that's why. I couldn't handle it. I felt small next to your love. Insecure. And instead of growing together, I chose to destroy. I still don't know who I am, but I know who you've always been. And what did you do? You forgave me. This taught me more than any punishment. Today, I see your peace. And it is deserved. This letter isn't about winning anything back. It's just about telling the truth. You were the best chapter of my life. And I closed the book before finishing the story. Daniel closed his eyes as he finished reading. He felt a lump in his throat, not from pain, but from humanity. Emily, finally, had understood. Too late, yes. But still, she had understood. And there was something profoundly righteous about that. Some truths only hurt when they're said out loud. And perhaps this letter was more for her than for him. But it was sincere. And that was enough. The next morning, Mia found him staring out the window. She asked if everything was okay. Daniel smiled, put the letter in a drawer, and replied with honest calm, "It is now." They went for a walk, hands intertwined, steps synchronized. Life no longer needed to be understood. Just lived. There was no more rush, no more ghosts. Just a present sustained by truth. And that truth, though forged in pain, was now their greatest strength. Because Daniel had finally learned that true love isn't the kind that never fails. It's the kind that, after the chaos, you never stop believing you can start over with someone who looks you in the eye and never looks away. And Emily would only see this from afar. Daniel never replied to the letter again. He read it only once, not because what was written wasn't important, but because there was no longer any need to keep that chapter open. He put the envelope in a box with other closed memories, a silent symbol that some stories need to be concluded without applause, without reunion, without revenge. Only with the silence of someone who understands they've gone too far to go back. Life no longer required justifications to move on. He was where he was supposed to be, and that was enough. Mia became, day by day, more present in his routine and, above all, in his soul. She was different from anything he'd ever experienced, not because she was perfect or because she promised forever, but because she walked beside him without trying to erase him. She saw him as he was, with his scars, with his memories, and yet, she chose him. Not as a healing project, but as someone whole, ready to build something new without having to destroy what came before. Daniel finally learned what it was like to live in a love that didn't require survival, just presence. A year after Daniel and Emily's last conversation, Olivia contacted him again. She asked him out for coffee, her tone light, unlike her usual. Daniel accepted. They sat in a new place, away from everything that tied them to the past. Olivia seemed more serene, her face less burdened, her gaze clearer. She explained that she had started over from scratch. She had gone back to school, decided to pursue the career she had put aside for years. She also said she had cut ties with people who had hurt her, including Emily. Not out of revenge, but because she needed space to breathe, and maintaining that bond was like opening the wound every day. She explained that, little by little, she had been forgiving herself. That she still carried guilt, but she no longer let it define who she was. Daniel listened attentively. There was no more resentment in his chest, but there was also no room for closeness. At the end of the conversation, he thanked her for her honesty and sincerely wished her happiness. Olivia smiled, a pure smile, like someone who finally understood what it means to let go. Emily followed a different path. Life, which once seemed to revolve around distractions and external validation, was now heavy. She lost friends, distanced herself from her family, including her sister. Loneliness didn't come suddenly, but as a series of voids she couldn't fill. She tried to start over, yes. She tried to reconnect, tried to connect with people from the past. But she realized, cruelly, that trust can't be rebuilt with speeches. It takes time. And time was what she lacked. At some point, she understood that, even having been forgiven, she would never be seen the same way again. And this silently tore her apart. The places she frequented with Daniel now seemed to avoid her. The songs that once touched her heart now ached. The house where they lived together was sold, not by her decision, but because it no longer made sense to live amid so many memories that could no longer be touched. The man with whom she'd exchanged glances and promises fled without explanation, and deep down, she knew, he was just another reflection of the emptiness she'd created. And no matter how much she tried to give new names to what she felt, she knew nothing was more real than the regret that weighed heavy with each dawn. She now lived with the knowledge of what she'd lost. Not just a husband. But a real love. A love that was home. A love that never returns. Months later, Daniel and Mia were ready to move to another city. Nothing sudden, nothing abrupt. It was simply the next step for someone who no longer had roots in the same soil. The decision was natural. A new job opportunity arose, and with it, a chance to build together, far from the rubble of what had been. They rented a house with large windows, full of light, where time seemed to pass more slowly. Daniel returned to playing the guitar. Not like before, not with melancholy. But with the lightness of someone who understands that the sound coming from the strings needs to be experienced in the present. Mia listened to him with a serene smile, as if hearing every note with her heart. On a cloudy afternoon, before the final move, Daniel passed by the old bookstore where, years ago, he had bought the book Emily had signed. He went in. He browsed the shelves as if searching for something, but without rushing. He picked up a new copy, read the back cover, ran his fingers over the pages, and smiled. As he paid, he exchanged glances with the clerk, who seemed to recognize the man who had come there frequently years ago. But there was no need to talk. Time, sometimes, answers everything in silence. In the new city, Daniel became a different version of himself. Lighter, calmer, more whole. The pain no longer had a home. It was just a memory of something that needed to happen for him to get where he was. Love with Mia was unhurried and unidealized. It was built with truth, with space, with presence. She didn't complete him. She accompanied him. And that, for him, was love. There were no promises of eternity, only the certainty of the present. And the present was everything. Emily, on the other hand, continued with the absence. A screaming absence. She tried to move on with other people, but realized the problem wasn't the other person. It was her. She was emotionally amputated from something she destroyed by choice. She knew it. And life, over time, showed her that certain mistakes don't lead to death, but to the condemnation of living with what was lost. She changed her number, abandoned social media. She became more reclusive. And on the few occasions she crossed paths with acquaintances, the pitying looks of others were a reminder that those who betray don't just lose trust. They lose the right to be remembered with affection. Years later, Daniel would be remembered by his colleagues as the man who overcame something cruel with class. Mia would describe him as someone who loved twice, once with pain, once with peace. And Olivia, when she heard his name in casual conversation, would simply take a deep breath, remembering what it cost her to maintain a silence that destroyed more than her conscience. And Emily, whenever she passed a cafe where they used to hang out, would pretend she didn't see it. But deep down, she knew, he was the love of her life. And she lost him. Not because he left, but because she pushed him away with her own choice. And now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Leave your comment below and share your opinion. We want to know how this story made you feel. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss future exciting stories like this. This story clearly shows what betrayal can do to a life, a relationship, a family. It doesn't just destroy a moment. It corrodes everything built with love, erases sincere gestures, burns the most beautiful memories, and leaves a void that will be difficult to fill. Betrayal isn't just a mistake. It's a decision that, when made, strips away not only the other person's trust but also the peace of the person who commits it. Those who betray themselves first. And almost always, you lose much more than you imagine. This channel does not support and will never support any form of betrayal here. Our stories serve as reflection, so that you understand that truth, loyalty, and sincere love are the only ways to build something that truly lasts. Until the next story.